I always like to begin my messages with a greeting to those who are tuning in on YouTube, so thanks for listening or watching. And again, welcome to everybody who's here. I'm so grateful to have the privilege of hosting the Caron Chapel experience week after week, and what's left to me by a man who had a tremendous influence in my life. I like to remember him, Father Bill, and today happens to be St. Patty's Day, so if that's important for some of you, yay, but we won't be drinking any green beer, and hopefully, most of us have to choose not to. And yeah, get started. I'm avoiding the topic here, apparently. The chapel service is built around the rotation of a series of themes, and today's theme is sort of a no-brainer in its relevance to people who are intersecting with Caron. Today's theme is the simple matter of change. But even though I said that, change is not a simple matter. It's a wonderfully deep subject, and it causes some of us to go at different times in different ways, and other people describe themselves as very sort of change-friendly until it gets tested in an area that's of difficulty, right? So I've been reflecting this week about the subject of change, and I have some stuff going on in my own life that's caused me to be really seeking to be in the change process in a fresh and different way. It's a kind of a recovery thing, and so I have some fresh things to say as a result about the topic, and I'm grateful for that. I have to kind of try and remember my outline until I veer away from it. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the way that early Alcoholics Anonymous came to think about change for people in addiction recovery, and the movement that has spread across the globe, and how many people cherish it, but there's a piece of the early AA 12-step vibe that I think has appropriately become somewhat outdated. And so there are people in the listening reach of this message who are going to be like hardcore old-fashioned AAers who will get nervous when I say that. But because there is a protective sort of quality to many people who feel like the whole AA thing was, almost or even divinely inspired and ought not to be edited. There's reluctance to change language that's viewed as patriarchal and the texts and a variety of things. There's a conservatism and even a kind of a fundamentalism that you can see with the early 12-steppers. I'm not a person who's wired that way. I think I love classics. I love things that have heritage, and I think we can appreciate things from antiquity that have beauty and not be dissuaded from looking at them, even though we find out that there were also parts of antiquity that we would not embrace anymore. Just for example, ancient texts that sort of accept enslavement as a part of the culture of the time, and today we would absolutely, completely, and fundamentally, I hope, reject the notion of the ownership of another human being. It doesn't mean that we couldn't take a look at those texts, and apart from whatever they may presume is happening in the social context, not learn from them. So, I'm already off tangent here. The change that came about for people in the early recovery movement had a feel about it, which tomorrow, my sponsor, Jean, will celebrate 55 years of sobriety, which is awesome. And Jean tells me about when he came into AA. And when he came into AA, it was, the AA is full of slogans and these different things, but one of the key slogans was KISS, which stood for Keep It Simple, Stupid. And then there was this saying, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. Like, you got nothing to say until you acquire some, and maybe that's for the first 90 days. The newcomer was to listen, not to try and hijack the airtime of the meeting. This is what I would call an old school Alcoholics Anonymous style, and I'm going to challenge. I think it's fading, and I think it needs to fade, in my opinion. In other words, more people will be helped the less we approach early recovery with that keep it simple, stupid kind of elitism that we think this is the best way to learn. So I wanted to jump quickly to an analogous sort of setting, because I think there's like an old school notion that change is, it's okay to help people change that way. And one of the great examples of that for me in my recent life, not for me personally, but was watching, is I have 2 boys in my life that came to me through my second marriage. I talk about family here fairly often, and Jared and Jason. So Jared now will be 30 this year. A number of years ago, 5 years ago, went to boot camp for the U.S. Coast Guard, and just finished serving 4 years in active duty in the Coast Guard. And so as parents, we were so proud of like Jared's decision to enter the Coast Guard. It's very competitive. He made it. There was all this stuff, and then and you go to Cape May for the U.S. Coast Guard's boot camp, and it's I think it may only be 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks of drill sergeant. You know, it's like and hazing and shave your head and like get yelled at and all that stuff. And there's this ethos within the military that kind of beat them down before you build them up is a wise form of education and development. And there are other, like, I don't know, I just was like celebrating the return of Grey's Anatomy. If any of you, I love that show, and I'm going to be sad when it's done. But the early Grey's Anatomy had a little bit more of that, like, hazing of the interns or whatever. Medical school training was like, 36 hours without sleep was okay. I hate to think of how many medical mistakes happened because of interns who had not had sleep, and there's still an edge to that, but it's changing. Coaching is another one in sports, like, rah! And then we see shows like Ted Lasso, which offer an image of a different sort of energy that can be brought to the project of helping people change and grow. So that's where I'm headed, is to talk about change and growth, because I think that this is a place that cultivates change and growth. And when I first started working here in 2008, and I traveled to various other treatment centers, and even to a corresponding site within Caron's organization, our Florida setting, people used to talk about Magic Mountain as if there was something wrong here, because their key slogan, "We will love you until you can love yourself," as if there was something like wussy about that. Well, we're proud of that here. I'm very proud that the ethos of this place even 15 years ago was one where the front note of the bouquet of the thing was about love and magic, rather than, and I think years ago you could go to treatment where it was like, you're gonna wash floors, you're gonna, give us your phone, and sit down, shut up, and we're gonna deliver you a solution, and you're gonna be fortunate that you got to come here, and and where it was really a kind of treatment was really a boot camp experience. I don't know to what extent that was true, but there's word on the hill here that 50, 60 years, this treatment center has been here a long time, that like, for example, you painted, you built buildings, you cooked in the kitchen, and that was presumed to be a part of the nature of treatment. And also, I do think there was a very confrontational, clinical deal here even before I got here. So, let's start going some more here. Okay, just kidding. If not drill sergeant, what would be the alternative? Is that just to, give up the hope that people could be supported in change? Or is there another way to support people in change? In 1983, there was a gentleman who's very important now in my life. I've never met him in person. I've sure seen a lot of his video work and heard interviews and read his materials. But his name is William Miller, and his co-writer is Stephen Rolnick. So Miller and Rolnick in 1983 published an article in a medical behavioral health journal about working in an addiction treatment center on the very subject I was just talking about. And their article is that, hey, there's evidence that while some people can get sober through the keep it simple, stupid, that more people may benefit from an entirely different, more compassion-oriented approach. And so Miller and Rolnick published in the article, the heading that they used for the description of their approach is motivational interviewing. So their notion is that in the engagement with a client, instead of a teaching, the professional would adopt an interviewing stance And I want to talk about the fundamentals of motivational interviewing for a couple minutes here, and then there's a key point here, which is intrinsic to the motivational interviewing philosophy and technique needs to be said before I continue, which is people don't change because somebody else tells them to. People change because they decide to change. Now, sometimes you may decide to change because of information you get coming in, but this was very well studied with medical compliance in physician work. So physicians would prescribe, and the classic model of even Marcus Welby, those of us old enough to remember the old country doctor, was you would have like a few minutes with the doc, you would tell him or her what's wrong, and then they would say, well, this is what you need to do, give you the piece of paper with it, and send you out the door, with the presumption that you would 100% adhere to the recommendations of the professional. Did everybody adhere? No. Somebody finally did a study, and medical adherence to physicians' prescriptions was about 30%. This is so people don't finish their antibiotics, people don't change their diet, people don't quit smoking, people don't, exercise more or whatever. And so these physicians who often were suffering from the M deity complex and thinking that they were fulfilling their vocation by enacting this sort of form of service delivery in these very brief encounters with this very simple notion, we're just going to tell you what to do, just go do it, we're actually limiting their capacity for effectiveness. And MI, motivational interviewing, has turned out to be really helpful for those kind of professionals, interestingly, and produced even many docs when they were first approached, hey, would you want to try something different? They're like, I don't have time to do anything, I'm too busy. But the evidence shows that if they would change their method in the same brief amount of time, more patient adherence occurs when you allow the patient to tell you what they're willing to do rather than you telling them what they have to do. So that's the paradigm shift and one way I was thinking about talking about it is instead of drill sergeant, fellow traveler, where the helping professional positions themselves as a fellow traveler on the journey of life. And it's much easier to sort of seek counsel from a fellow traveler than it is to go up to an authority figure who's going to tell you what to do, which engages, at least in me, that whole rebellious crap. If you tell me I have to do something, my first thought is, oh yeah? And none of you have that at all, I'm sure. But this is part of the MI insight, is that, in fact, that's the part of a person that is the least helpful in the room in a situation like this. So if I were to pick on the woman who just sang so beautifully for us, and I would say, this is what you need to do, it's very possible that she would go, oh yeah? And activate. And then we're in the activity of debate, which is the worst thing that's possibly, once I'm fighting with you about whether you want to change or not, you're likely to dig in, and I'm likely to push harder, and the next thing you know, screw this place, right? That's where that can take this. And then I feel awful, and maybe the person feels awful because they've had good intentions to come here. So instead, there's a capacity in the, I didn't ever say the point I thought it really needed to be said. So before I talk about how helping professionals do this, the key point I wanted to say was that you can be your own helping professional. And that's my reason for delivering this talk, is not to teach you how to be a clinician, except to yourself. Because inside, you have an inner coach voice, right? And in fact, there's a whole bunch of workshops that are provided around the world that help you address your inner critic. Because most of us have a pretty drill sergeant-y inner voice in there. It's like, you suck! You look in the morning, you're like, I can't believe you did that again. And you're never gonna, I can hear my older brother and my dad, and those voices are in us. And the message of this insight from the behavioral health arena is that they're not the most helpful voices. They're not going to really win us over. They may very well, activate your inner teenager, and the next thing you know, you're in this internal stuck place. So, in the training of MI, we're taught 4 things that are key to the essence of the better outcome. And these are things I offer to you as persons on YouTube or in the room, because you can offer them to yourself. Instead of you're like being a drill sergeant or thinking that you came here for drill sergeantness, you can expect from us better than that. And you can offer yourself better than that. The 4 keys to the MI ethos, spirit, are compassion, empathy, acceptance, and empowerment. This is to avoid outright criticism, labeling, debate, and confrontation. So I have an inner debater, I have an inner confrontation voice, I have all this sort of stuff, but what if I were to try to help myself move in the direction of change with a voice of compassion, of empathy for myself? No wonder I got like this, right? And that's where some insight can be helpful. That's when I think about my oldest brother and my dad, like, and how they were wired, which was kind of that old school style. That's where I came by this honestly. And so fits the early chill thing, right? Like, let's take down the temperature a little bit, and I'm going to be more likely to be more successful in moving in a direction of change in a non-confrontational engagement of myself with issues that are coming to my awareness. So you might wonder, like, to what extent this is true, or how would I bring this really concretely into my life? And I have a couple of practical tips, and then I'll finish up. But before I move to the practical tips, one of the things I will say is there is overwhelming evidence that this is persuasive in terms of helping people change and grow. So if there's a person in the room that's like, I don't know, boot camp needs to stay boot camp, or coaching needs to stay coaching, or medical training needs to stay medical training, or old AA was old AA and it needs to stay that way. And, everybody's gotten soft and wussy, and well, here's the truth. More people are getting sober today than used to. And coaching has been tested. This has been research-driven testing in coaching, in medicine, not yet in the military, but I would tell you, because of the persuasive overtake of tons of other fields, where MI techniques have been used instead of the old school apprenticeship style sit down, shut up model, and outcomes have improved. That there's like the argument in my mind is over. There's no way to continue to hold to the idea that there's some sphere in which change and growth happens better in people if you yell at them. I don't think it's a tenable argument anymore. Or even if you just talk down to them. Because that's the problem with the deity thing. It's not that the doctor yelled at you, although often it felt like it, but it's the power differential rather than the movement into the fellow traveler mode. So in moving into fellow traveler mode with yourself and allowing us to move into fellow traveler mode with you as families or individuals affected by addiction, one of the things that's really clear, there's a particular key tip I want to get to, but there's a couple of tips along the way. One of which is to embrace complexity. So I'm old enough now to remember over the course of my life when I started waking up to black and white thinking being shallow, and that things I wanted to think of as black and white were often allowed a lot of gray. And the problem is not even binary in this case. It's that most change is very complex, especially when you're talking about behavioral health change. It's different if it's, if you have a simple objective like quitting smoking, that's a simple objective. But I will say smoking enters into every sphere of the smoker's life. And so there's a whole lot to it when you start thinking, why should I quit smoking, or what will it affect by stopping? And then it becomes quickly, almost anything that involves a person becomes really multifactorial. And one of the key words in the study of motivational interviewing is ambivalence. It's a good word. I like big words. I think words are important. But I think, for me, I would say almost, and they're pulling away from the use of that term, trying to make in teaching MI over the years, they've learned to try and get more and more into common sense English language, simple terminology, because it's really a simple issue. And ambivalence just means like being uncertain, right? Discrepancy, that's the term. I sort of feel this way and that way about something, And in fact, I can feel 6 weeks, like, and think about like, well, where do you want to take a trip? You might want to take a trip locally, far away, Europe, like blah, blah, blah. So that it doesn't mean you're ambivalent, it means you're polyvalent. You have tons of different choices and you're navigating these streams of possibilities. In the navigation of streams of possibilities, binary thinking is often where you end up. It's like, and that's sort of like, in any case, you have to make these yes or no choices. Will I smoke the cigarette? Won't I smoke? That's a nice binary. Like, do you? If you light up, you don't. Grey's Anatomy, if any of you were watching the other night, there's a doctor who's an alcoholic, and he has a drink, and he's sitting there, and you're like intense, terrified he's going to drink it, and they leave you in like dramatic suspense until you find out later in the episode, no, he didn't put it to his lips. So that's the binary choice that is really there. We have times when we have to choose between one thing and another. But even there's always complexity to it. So in the embrace of complexity, it used to be, this is another old school thing that MI makes us rethink. It used to be that people talk about, why don't you do a pro and con list, right? Like, why don't you think, what would be good, what would be bad about it? And then there was like a pro and con thinker who was like, no, actually pro and con lists could be fourfold. So there's a thing that's called a decisional balancing matrix, and the well-trained addiction professional knows the decisional balancing matrix. And it's pro and con for choice A or pro and con for choice B. I get this if I quit smoking, and I lose this if I quit smoking. I get this if I keep smoking, and I lose this if I keep smoking, right? So and buying choice, there may be favorable and unfavorable things. Well, what MI research has shown is that there's a trick there, which is if you kind of know which direction you're willing to be leaning in. So if you really want to talk yourself out of getting sober, then there's a way to do that. And if you really want to talk yourself into getting sober, there's a way to do that too. And this is, I think in the end, my wife would say, Jack, this is all common sense. Making a theory is so dumb. But she's probably right. So if you actually want to change, which I think most of our patients do, I think by the time you get here, I think most of our patients realize like the addiction is costing them so much, it's like not worth hanging on to anymore. I just had to catch my eye with somebody I know has been great at wrestling with ambivalence here. And some of our patients do that really well. And then years ago, when a patient would say, I don't know, I think I still might go drinking, it's as if people like, I can't believe what's said in the room. I'm sorry, why shouldn't you be able to say that in rehab? Like, there's nothing per se wrong with thinking that. And actually, ambivalence continues. Once you decide to pursue a choice, like to marry this person or whatever, it doesn't mean that your brain will never ever think about the other choices that you could have taken. Ambivalence persists after a decision train has been pursued. And we're lying to ourselves if we refuse to acknowledge that that voice may raise itself within us. However, the two things on the decisional matrix, if you actually want to go in the direction you've decided you want to go in, then you want to puff up the negatives of the other direction, and you want to puff up the positives of the direction you want to go in. You want to lean in the direction of change and lean away from the direction of sustain. So this is really helpful, actually. So if you're wondering, should I be here, should I not? Stop fanning the flame of why not. You'll talk yourself right out of this mountain. You can talk yourself, and that's because you are the person who's going to do what you do. That's to go right back to the beginning. People do what they decide to do, no matter how much they get coached, encouraged, softly coddled, or barked at. Eventually, a person is like, this is what I'm going to do. And our feet tell the story of the choice that we've made. We don't necessarily make it rationally or whatever. So change is hard. It's very complex. It's very personal. And people who tell us that we would be best helped to change by sort of strict measures are actually incorrect. And it's collegiality, partnership, and compassion and love that helps people change. And we could take the message inside. We could start a different way of being with ourselves. And I'm not saying everybody in here is like the self-critic gone mad, but a lot of us are. A lot of us have been nastier to ourselves than we would ever be to. It's like the old thing we say, we're meaner to our family than we are to, but I think we're meaner to ourselves than we even are sometimes to our family. This inner critic thing is a part of the whole, nightmare of our existence, and I think worse in the social media world. So let's be nice. Maybe that's the whole takeaway of the message. Let's try to move in the direction of positive change and growth, taking lessons from incredibly important research of the last 40 years, which suggests that a calm and loving and empathic and accepting engagement of ourselves with the other participants in which we're involved in exploring and making move in the direction of change will be way more effective than some of our inclinations, which have been strict with ourselves. I've got to do this, got to do that. It can be really tempting. I surely have had this fight with myself. So I think I made the points. Just don't know how to close. I want to ask you to be soft. Take it easy. Like, it's awesome that you're here. It's amazing that you're here. Something brought you into this place. And if you're still ambivalent, let us know. It's okay. It is okay to be unsure if you're supposed to be here. It's okay to not know if you're a husband or wife or son or daughter or mom or dad should be in treatment or not. It's okay if you don't know. It's okay if you don't know. And that's the best place to begin, is to begin to sort of tease out the real complexity of it, and then start leaning in the direction you feel called. Thank you very much. Have a great day.